one of the biggest headlines out of all of the headlines tomorrow is going to be this vote supporting the homeless services tax. If we want to pop that up again, voters in Portland approving this 1% tax, and I think it's something we should talk to Maggie Vespa about. I know Maggie's been covering this in a lot of detail and just sat through a news conference from the people who supported this measure. I assume that they're over the moon. I don't think that there was any guarantee that this was going to pass, but it appears that voters in Portland want this to happen. What was the reaction tonight from those supporters?
So Dan, they started it off, and by the way, this was a Zoom news conference that they planned prior to tonight in the hopes that they would win. It was a planned sort of victory conference with fingers crossed, they noted. But basically tonight they said, we're really excited, but we're not surprised. They were worried, as everybody is, because these times are so unpredictable and they had no idea how voters would react. And, maybe people are more scared, less likely to endorse a new tax because of the pandemic, and therefore maybe they're in more trouble than they thought. But deep down, they said they always felt like Portland would come through in their minds and indeed endorse this tax, which we now know that they have. So to kind of review, $250 million a year coming into Metro starting next year is when that revenue will start flowing in. And that's from a 1% tax on basically high earners and then businesses that bring in more than $5 million in revenue a year. They had a huge fundraising week in this last week leading up to the election. The campaign behind the measure did. And they said basically they felt like that was the surge coming through at the end because they had started to see some opposition advertising. And that kind of caused them to ramp up their efforts because they felt like the opposition might have more of a footing, again, because of the pandemic and because everybody is so scared. They did tell us, or they did confirm, I should say, that they did get multiple donations from Oregon Governor Kate Brown in the last few weeks. As far as when services could change, both to, for those wondering who need access to housing or need help keeping their housing, and then both for everybody wondering who just sees the impacts of our housing crisis on our streets. We were told it's kind of iffy. In normal times, basically, they said counties would have no problem ramping up services now, knowing that the money is coming in later and then just paying it back later. Right now, as we know, local governments have their budgets gutted because of the pandemic. They don't have the revenue coming in from the kind of tourism taxes and others and business taxes. And so they don't have the money to front these services like they normally would. That said, that doesn't mean that some services won't wrap up. They have a whole system in place as to figure out where exactly this money is going to be spent, how much is going to go where between the three counties and between different kinds of services. Primarily, they pointed out a lot more rental assistance will probably be needed because of the pandemic than maybe would have been needed during normal times. So perhaps the allocation has changed a little bit and those perspectives have changed a little bit. But yeah, just to kind of reiterate their message off the top, they said this was really exciting. They weren't surprised, but they were relieved, and they really feel like Portland area voters came through for them. Guys, I'm going to toss it back to you.
Yeah, Maggie, few people that we work with, nobody that we work with here at KGW works as closely with the topic of homelessness as you do. And I think most people who live in this city observe homelessness, but you're one of the people who knows the people in this community, the people trying to help the folks in this community. What are you hearing from them as they anticipated this vote, and what are you thinking they're feeling now, knowing that the funding that I think a lot of them were hoping for is going to in fact be there?
So the head of Join, that's interesting that you asked that. The head of Join, which is a group that helps basically connect those who need housing to the myriad of services that could help them get to it, because there's going to be a lot of red tape. It can be very confusing. She came on the call and she said, you have no idea how hard it's been for our staff to look families in the eye as recently as this week and tell them, and these are families who say we need help now or we will lose our housing this week or this month, and tell them, I'm so sorry, we don't have anything for you. And she said it is the most horrific feeling. And she said, and to know, number one, that a lot more families and a lot more people might be finding themselves in that scenario, particularly for the very first time. And they point out people who maybe have always done well enough to be able to afford housing, it's really jarring when for the first time they need help finding it. They have no idea how to navigate the system. And so a lot of people might be finding themselves in that scenario now because of the situation that we're in. And so she said, especially, knowing what we've been through and given the current crisis that we're all experiencing, this is just such a huge relief to know that we will have to look fewer families in the eye and tell them, I'm sorry, we can't help you. And so she was holding her toddler in this Zoom news conference, and she, was just really speaking from the heart. And you could tell this was personal for people who work in housing and in advocacy for those who are houseless. It is absolutely personal, and she was just over the moon. It was really sweet.